That was the day my suffering began, for a sin that was never mine. The first thing I remember was the pain. It did not feel like a wound. It felt like a curse being written into my bones. My skin burned beneath the gaze of a goddess. My breath broke in my throat. My hands trembled as I reached for my hair and felt something moving where my hair had been. Serpents, living, breathing, whispering against my face. I tried to scream, but the sound that came out of me no longer sounded human. The temple walls watched in silence. The marble floor beneath my knees was cold, and above me, the goddess I had served had already turned away. You know my name as a warning. You know my face as a curse. But the stories told by men rarely ask what happened before the monster was born. They say I turned men to stone because I hated the world. They say a hero came for my head, and justice was done. But heroes are not always free, and monsters are not always born from evil. Before the island, before the shield, the sword, and the boy who came to kill me, I was a woman. I was a servant of Athena, and this is how the world took that from me. My name was once spoken with admiration, not as a warning, not as a curse. I served Athena in her temple, believing devotion could protect me from the hunger of men and the cruelty of power. I was wrong. The men who came to the temple did not always come to pray. Some came to stare. Some came with gifts I never asked for. Some mistook silence for permission. I kept my vows. I lowered my eyes. I gave them nothing. But in a world ruled by gods and kings, innocence is not always enough to save you. Then Poseidon came, lord of the sea, breaker of storms, a god who entered Athena's sacred temple as if no door, no vow, no mortal life could stand before him. I will not give glory to what he did. I will not dress it in poetry. I will only say this. When he left, the temple was still standing. The goddess's statue still looked down from above, but I was not the same. I waited for Athena to see me, not as an insult to her temple, not as a stain upon her name, as the woman who had served her and been broken beneath her roof. Instead, she saw disgrace. Poseidon was beyond her reach, so her anger found the only one still kneeling on the marble floor. Me. There was no trial. No mercy, only judgment. I reached toward Athena's statue, not in anger, but in the desperate hope that my goddess would understand me. She gave me nothing. Then came the curse, and with it, the end of the woman I had been. I did not understand what she had made of me. I only knew that my own face had become something I was afraid to see. The first sound after my transformation was not thunder. It was silence. So I covered my face and ran, past the columns I had once cleaned with my own hands, away from the goddess who had taken everything from me and called it justice. Behind me, the sacred place remained. Before me, there was only exile. I fled toward the sea, toward the rocks, toward a place where no one would have to look at me again. That was how I came to the island. That was how the priestess disappeared. And that was how the world began preparing the name it would give me. Monster. The island did not welcome me. It simply gave me a place where no one had to see what I had become. There were cliffs of dark stone and caves carved by the sea. For the first time in my life, no one followed me. No prayers, no footsteps, no voices calling my name. Only the wind and the serpents whispering where my hair had been. I thought silence would be mercy. I was wrong. I avoided the pools of rainwater. I turned away from the sea when it grew too still. I covered my face even when there was no one there to see it. I did not yet understand the curse. I only knew that Athena had made me into something even I was afraid to look at. Then, the silence broke. A wounded goat had wandered near my cave. Its leg was caught between the rocks and its cries echoed through the stone. For one brief moment I forgot what I was. I went to help. I pulled the stones apart with trembling hands. The animal struggled free, turned toward me, and looked into my eyes. The cry stopped. Flesh became stone. Movement became stillness. Life became silence. I stepped back, unable to breathe. I had not touched it. I had not wished it harm. I had only looked. That was when I understood. The curse was not only in my face, it was in the space between my eyes and the world. From that day on, the island was no longer my refuge. It was my prison, and I was both the prisoner and the danger inside it. The world had not yet begun to hunt me. The men who would come for glory had not yet crossed the sea. But I already knew what they would find. A woman no one could look at. A curse no one could survive. While I was learning to fear my own reflection, another life was being shaped far from my island. His name was Perseus. He was not born into safety. Before he ever held a sword, before the world called him hero, he was a child cast into the sea with his mother, sealed inside a wooden chest because a king feared what he might become. His mother was Danae. She had been locked away by her own father, not for a crime, but because prophecy had made her dangerous in the eyes of a powerful man. That was the first shadow over Perseus's life. Not glory, not conquest, fear. The sea carried mother and child to the island of Seriphos, where they survived not because the gods were kind, but because fate had not finished using them. Perseus grew there with no throne, no army, no kingdom waiting for him. Only his mother. And for a time, that was enough. But power always finds the vulnerable. Polydectes, the king of Seriphos, desired Danae, and Perseus, young and proud, stood in his way. So the king did what powerful men often do. He built a trap around the boy's courage. At a royal gathering, when the room watched and shame pressed against his throat, Perseus promised the impossible. He would bring back the head of Medusa. My head. He did not know me. He did not know my story. He only knew the name the world had begun to whisper. Gorgon. Monster. Death with a woman's face. To him, I was not a person yet. I was the task placed between him and humiliation, between him and the king who wanted his mother unprotected. And Polydectes accepted the promise because he never expected Perseus to return. That was the truth, hidden beneath the legend. A king did not send a hero to win glory. He sent a son to die. And somewhere beyond the sea, I sat alone on my island, unaware that another prisoner of power had just been pointed toward me like a weapon. For a time, the island kept my secret, but rumors need time before they become legends. I learned to live with my face covered. I learned the paths between the caves and the places where I could hear the sea without seeing its reflection. It was not peace, but it was distance. Then the first boat came. I heard it before I saw it, wood scraping against stone and the heavy sound of feet climbing the shore. At first I thought they were lost. I almost called out. Then I heard my name. Not spoken with pity, but spoken like a prize. They had come searching for the cursed woman. They never asked if I wanted to be found. I hid deeper in the cave and begged them to leave. They laughed. One of them stepped closer, sword in hand. "No woman," he said, "can stop us all." I warned him. My voice shook. "Do not look at me." He came anyway, so I let them see my face. The laughter died first. Then the man did. Stone climbed over him before his sword could fall. His mouth stayed open, frozen around a breath he would never finish. The others ran, but fear travels faster than mercy. Soon more came. Warriors, hunters. Men who believed killing me would make their names eternal. Every time I begged them to turn back, they heard only weakness. So the island changed. The cave paths filled with silence, and the shadows filled with statues. I stopped counting them, but I never forgot the first goat or the first man. That was how the world learned to fear me, not from the truth, but from the survivors. In their stories, I was no longer a woman hiding. I was the danger waiting in the dark. And that was the cruelest part of the curse. Every time I survived, the world had another reason to call me a monster. While I stood alone in the dark, the gods who had abandoned me were already sharpening the sword of my executioner. Perseus had made the promise in front of a king. Now he had to survive it. No mortal could face me with courage alone. By then, the stories had crossed the sea. Men knew what happened to those who looked into my eyes. They knew swords had failed. They knew pride had become stone inside my caves. So help came to Perseus, not to restore the truth, not to undo what had been done to me, but because fate had chosen its next instrument. Athena gave him a polished shield, bright enough to hold my reflection without forcing him to meet my eyes. Hermes gave him a blade made for a task no ordinary weapon could finish. Others guided him toward what he still needed, winged sandals to cross the world, a hidden cap to move unseen, and a special bag to carry what no man should have wanted to hold: my head. Each tool made him more prepared. Each step brought him closer. But I do not believe Perseus felt like a hero then. Heroes in songs move with certainty. Perseus moved because turning back meant returning empty-handed to the king who wanted his mother alone. That was the chain around him. Not iron, love. He was a son trying to protect the only person who had protected him. Perhaps the heavens admired his courage. Or perhaps they simply enjoyed placing weapons in mortal hands and calling the ruin that followed destiny. I did not know any of this then. I only knew the island had grown quieter. Fewer men came after the statues spread through the caves. Fewer voices climbed the rocks. The world had learned to fear me from a distance. But fear does not stop every man. Sometimes it becomes the very thing that calls him forward. Across the sea, Perseus followed the path opened before him, carrying everything I had never been given: protection, guidance, and the favor of the gods. Others had come with pride. He came with purpose, and that made him far more dangerous. For the first time since my transformation, I felt a shadow over the island that did not belong to the clouds. The hunter was coming, and this time I knew the silence would not protect me. Perseus reached my island without shouting my name. That was the first thing that made him different. The others had come loud with pride, calling me monster before they ever saw my face. He entered the cave paths in silence, stepping between the statues of men who had once believed courage could save them. He saw the swords frozen in stone, the mouths left open, the fear that had survived longer than the men themselves. But he did not run. He raised Athena's shield instead. In its polished surface, he watched the darkness ahead without giving me his eyes. Of course, the gods had taught him how to survive me. They had not protected me when I begged. They had not answered me in the temple. But for the man sent to take my head, they had given a shield, a blade, and a path. So when he stepped into the heart of the cave, I moved first. The serpents rose around my face. My shadow broke across the stone. He turned at once, not toward me, but toward my reflection. His sword came up. Mine was the only weapon I had never asked for: my eyes. He moved carefully, following me through the shield as I circled him from the dark. I struck from the side. He barely turned in time. Steel cut the air where my body had been, and sparks leapt from the stone wall. For a moment, I hated him. Not because of who he was, because he had been given every protection I'd been denied. I attacked again, faster this time, forcing him back between the statues. He stumbled, caught himself, and lifted the shield with shaking hands. That was when I saw it. Not hunger, not pride, not the thrill of a man chasing glory. Fear. The same fear I had felt beneath Athena's statue. Perseus was not smiling. He was not celebrating the hunt. He looked like a man doing something he wished the world had never asked of him. Then, through the breath between one strike and the next, I heard him whisper, "Forgive me. This is not what I wanted, but I have to save my mother." And something inside me broke for the last time. He was not my enemy. He was my mirror. Two lives bent by powers greater than our own. Two souls forced into a story neither of us had chosen. I could have struck again. He was close enough. One look, and the cave would have another statue. But I saw him trembling behind the shield, and for the first time since the curse, my eyes did not feel like a prison. They felt like a choice. So I lowered the serpents, not in defeat, not in surrender, in mercy. I closed my eyes and gave him my silence. The blade fell. My death was not his victory. It was the only freedom either of us had left. Perseus returned across the sea, carrying the only part of me the world still valued. Polydectes was waiting for a funeral, not a hero. He had sent a son to die, hoping to leave a mother defenseless. But he forgot that power is a double-edged blade, and that even a broken life can leave behind a weapon. When he looked upon my face, the face he had demanded as a trophy, the throne he used to oppress others, became his eternal prison. He turned to stone. I was gone, my voice silenced and my eyes closed forever. But for the first time, my curse did not create a victim. It created a sanctuary. The same gaze that had made the world fear me became the force that broke Danae's chains. The monster they created in that temple was the only thing that could save a woman from the hands of another powerful man. Perhaps that was the only justice the gods would ever allow me. Not the return of my life, not the peace of the temple, and not the face I once loved, but this, that my suffering was finally given a purpose. My story was never about a hero slaying a beast. It was the story of two victims of power, bound by fate, until my curse became his mercy. In the end, Perseus did not find glory in my death. He found the strength to protect what he loved. And I was no longer the danger in the dark. I was the shield for the innocent. And in that final, silent justice, I was finally free.